Albert, it's now your turn, and now we are officially beginning the scientific sessions of our meeting.
Thank you, Martin. I will first give a brief talk, as I was requested, to introduce both the meeting and the session, and after that I will turn over to the speakers. So let me find my talk. Yep. Share the screen. I start. Okay, I hope you can see the slides now. So this is an APN meeting. It's a study in evolution. We study how our stars and objects evolve, but our study itself has also evolved over time. In the past, the PNs stood for planetary nebulae. For me, APN is still the asymmetric planetary nebula meeting, even though the name actually has also evolved since then. So planetary nebulae are the shapes of stars to come. If you want to know what the sun looks like in 5 billion years from now, look at the planetary nebulae. And their shapes are amazing, but how do they get those shapes? And if you look at planetary nebulae with the funny shapes, the beauties, which stars do they represent? So could you look at a star these days and already predict what kind of planetary nebula it might make in a couple of billion years' time? Are planetary nebulae a model for other types of stars? Is it just the progenitors of planetary nebulae that do these weird things? Or do high-mass stars also do it? The study over the years has evolved over the mass range of stars. And nowadays we call it Asymmetrical Post-main-sequence Nebulae, because it is not just the planetary nebulae that shows the shaping, even they may be the ones that are best known. So we've had quite a series of meetings on this topic, starting with Noam in 1994 in Israel. At this time it was just an APN meeting, there was no number 1 attached, and I don't think it was envisaged at that time that there would be a series of them. Joel Kastner in 1999 organized the next one, so he has the credit for turning it into a sequence. Number 3 was at Mount Rainier in the US again in 2003. After that we moved to La Palma in 2007, to the UK, the Lake District in APN 5 in 2010, Braving the Weather, which was the best I think we've ever seen in the UK. 2013 in the Yucatan in Mexico. Number 7 in Hong Kong in 2017, after a little bit of a gap, but now we have the longest APN meeting ever, lasting 2 years in Granada in Spain, with a brief break in the middle from next week until sometime in 2023. It's the same meeting. If you look at all the locations, you see that there are some quite volcanic ones in there. Mount Rainier, of course, La Palma currently erupting. The Lake District is an old volcano, so it is not. The meetings also have quite interesting shapes, and the people are quite interesting too. This is one from I think this was from APN 4, or might be APN 3, where you can see some of the main characters, and boy are they characters. But they are the ones who have made these meetings to what they have become. Over the time, we've lost some people who were quite important and good friends of ours in the field. Hugo Swartz, of course, in a lot of the fields comes from him. He was a visionary in the effect of the binaries on the shaping. Olivier Chénaud, again, a visionary who could do miracles with high resolution data. And he could look at an interferogram and see the structure that was behind it, something that I've never been able to do. Ed Hawkins, of course, the person who always put himself last, but his research and his ideas were second to none. And often when I need new ideas for research, I go back to his old papers, and all the ideas are in there. And all 3, sadly, are no longer with us. The APN meeting have had quite a culture, and specific culture that has been built over the time. And I've written down some aspects here, there are probably more that I've missed. A very important one that we look for synergies. as astronomers, we often are specialists in quite narrow fields, and we have very set ideas. So we can really benefit by finding the synergies between our different specializations, different data sets, the models and the data, different type of stars, high mass, low mass. There is a lot of synergy between them. We are always focused on, and I think it's no one who's always pushed that, you have to interpret the data with the models that you have. The data in itself speaks, but it's not intelligible. You need to have the models to interpret it. And of course, we want to have the best models. But the data itself, you also have to be very critical of. And the data is continuously improving. And you should always use the best telescopes you can get a hands on. And you should not limit yourself just to one wavelength. The answers to the problems that we're studying are found at any wavelength, or at every wavelength. And very important, use each other. Yes, we all give presentations, but the most important part of these meetings is the discussion. It is as important, if not more important, than the presentations. And keep an open mind. The answer may not be what we would like it to be. But we've learned from the discussion between binarity and magnetic fields that the answer turned out to be, it's both. And to quote, and that's Jaco van Loon, came up with this one, celestial beauty is served by a sharp eye and an open mind. So what is the problem? The problem is very basically illustrated by two images, one from ELMA by Matthias Merker, showing at that time a very regular spherical ACB star. The data has evolved a bit since then on that one. And compare that to a planetary nebula, NGC 6543 in this case, from Joel Kastner. And the problem is going from one to the other. And the problem is not specific to planetary nebulae, it is across the mass range. That is the problem. That is the big problem. And that is that it is a simple problem if you have simple data. The better data you get, the harder the problem becomes. The harder we look, the more structure we find. And that can give just the impression that the problem is getting more and more complex, more and more unsolvable. But in fact, it means that we are finding the things we were ignoring before. We're getting closer to the answer, but maybe via a roundabout route. These are images of the Helix Nebula. The Helix Nebula, of course, we all know, the beautiful helix in the center, very bright star. And then the globules. The globules are well studied and maybe not as well understood as they should be. In spite of being a very evolved nebula, very molecule rich, all in the globules. But look in the outer region. That is something that John Meeburn studied 6 or 7 years ago. And you'll find an outer arc, and you find even a jet. And the jet has a bow shock. And that is a jet on both sides. They're not perfectly aligned, as if they go in slightly different directions. And this jet is moving at 300 kilometers per second. Is it older than the nebula? Is it younger than the nebula? We don't know. What we do know is that people claim that the Helix Nebula is not a binary system. Now, you may have some doubts about it. I certainly have doubts about it, but in photometric studies, there is no evidence that there is a second component to the central star of the helix. So where does the jet come from? So the harder we look, the more difficult it gets. And the very big problem is that we lack evolutionary sequences. We don't know what evolves into what. We have a group called protoplanetary nebula, but do they evolve into planetary nebulae? We don't know. We have a group of post-AGB stars, of course, with some overlap with the proto-PN. Do those evolve from the AGB? And in some cases, we have a good idea. If they're carbon-rich, yes, but for others, we don't. How do binaries evolve? And basically, if Ursula's right, all planetary nebulae are closed binaries. If she's not right, quite a lot of planetary nebulae are closed binaries. And those are not known on the AGB. So where do they come from? How do those binaries evolve? How do massive stars do it? High mass stars, so very similar evolution. They go through a red giant phase. Okay, it's red supergiants, but it's still red giants. And they show, in some cases, similar structures. Eta Carinae, of course, is a very well-known examples. It's those bubbles where you look at it and say, yeah, it could very well have been a planetary nebula. It belongs in an APN meeting. The rings in supernova 1987A have shown us that there was things in the circumstellar environment that were hidden before. But even if the structures are the same or similar, do they have the same origin? Binary interactions are very important, and they show structures that certainly we would have considered as interest to APN meetings. So here is one from Olivier Chénaud, Nova V1280 Scorpii. Notice it's very high resolution, there's only a few tenths of an arc-second across, typical for Olivier's work. And what you clearly see there is a bipolar flow. Which in the case of a nova may not be surprising, but you still need the data to show it. At the bottom is the symbiotic star R Aquarii. Of course, that also, you know, it's a binary system, very similar, a wide binary rather than a very close binary. On the left, you see the Hubble picture, and quite a large scale, a beautiful structure. In the middle, you see a focus, a close-up of that, of the core, and then on the right, you see what a ground-based telescope does with the same thing. And the resolution that you get with SPHERE is actually amazing. Suddenly, you can see all the details which Hubble Space Telescope could not see. Maybe the James Webb will see these kind of things. And here you can really see the jet coming out of the nucleus. You see the nucleus is a double. So it is far enough apart you can see it, and you see that the jet clearly comes from one of those two components. So that is the binary shaping. How about the magnetic shaping? That field was thrown wide open by Wouter Flemings about 15 years ago, I think, for the first time, when he showed that it was a very organized magnetic field in the jet of W43A, one of those AGB, post-AGB stars. Over a length of about 500 AU, you can see that the magnetic field is a toroidal field surrounding the jet. And he puts that magnetic field at the interface between the jet and the surrounding medium. Similar structures have been found elsewhere. OH231.8 to 4.2. Laurent Sabin has shown that in last year. On the left is her data with the magnetic field directions. On the right is the model, but maybe the model goes a little bit further than the data, but this is the basic idea. So are the jets that we see really magnetic towers? Whenever you have a binary interaction, you have to be careful to avoid stellar mergers, but maybe you don't have to avoid them. And they're very popular these days. I mean, half the universe seems to be merging. Here is an example of HD 11585. This is Hans Olofsson, who made this object into his pet, and he's finding the most amazing results. Well, every 2 years he's got another amazing result in it. And this is now seen as a post-RGB, post-common envelope system, where the two stars have merged on the RGB, and as a result formed this structure with various bipolar flows in different directions. Other systems are known that seem to be mergers, and this pattern that they show jets that are moving around, maybe processing, seems to be a common feature of that. Of course, how you get a processing jet in an object that is no longer a binary is not so clear, but you get multiple outflows of these things. Post-common envelope systems, a significant fraction of planetary nebulae have very close central stars. I've mentioned that. Periods of around 1 day, the nebulae are low mass, very messy structure, often have jets. 2 of those have shown a nova eruption at some time, although you don't know whether the nova eruption will repeat, or just as a one-off event from accretion during the mass loss. So where did these objects come from? Then you have the bipolar nebulae, which are maybe better known, which have high mass nebulae. They have very nice bipolar lobes, that they name from, very well structured nebulae, very different from those post-common envelope systems. Wide binaries, perhaps. Here you see 2 examples. On the left, a post-common envelope system, DS1. You see that irregular nebula with the blobs, and in fact, I think this one does have a jet as well. On the right-hand side, you see a bipolar nebula, very much better structure, and here the binary has a period of 16 days. Is that a post-common envelope system? We don't know. Here you see one that is clearly not a post-common envelope system. This is Myra. It has a white dwarf companion, 100 AU away. There's interaction between the binary and the wind from the AGB star. There's an accretion disk. There's a high velocity outflow. Papers by Ramstad, by John Meeburn. So clearly there is a lot of effect that this companion has on the shape. So there are some serious questions to be answered. What do the precursors look like? What are the initial conditions? How do jets get launched? Where did they get the energy from? Why are they so well focused? When do they get launched? Before the big mass loss? After the big mass loss? Is there a jet lag? To use the phrase from Pat Huggins. So where are the common envelope systems? We see the post-common envelope systems. Where are the common envelope systems themselves? And how do they evolve? Very important, do high mass and low mass systems have the same shaping mechanism? So some serious questions to be answered. To answer them, we need to peek into the cores of the systems, really very high resolution data. We need new models. The hydrodynamic models that are being produced are really impressive. We do need to make sure they have the right initial conditions, the right computing power. They are demanding systems, and they have to model the real world. So they have to produce something we can compare with our actual data. New physics. Well, that is the pet term I probably hate most in physics. We don't need new physics. We have all the physics we need. But it is a physics of complexity. And we need to know how the physics interacts, how all the different equations apply. Remember this painting? I stole this one from Geronimo Bernard Salas, by the way, who made this. A very nice painting from Van Gogh. And this is how he viewed the sky, with those the stars and the way that he saw it with his eyesight. But if he had known what we know, he would not have painted them like this. He would have painted them like this. And with that, I will stop the screen share